We're at an inflection point. The current administration's approach to immigration enforcement has sparked something we haven't seen much of lately from mainstream outlets: real-time fact-checking that doesn't wait for the next news cycle. When MSNBC's Ari Melber interrupted Secretary Kristi Noem's briefing to identify factual problems with her statements, he wasn't editorializing. He was documenting a gap between official claims and observable reality. That kind of immediate accountability matters, especially when government officials are shaping public understanding of controversial enforcement actions. The vice president recently suggested that media reporting itself generates civil unrest and incites violence. That's a complete reversal of cause and effect. The tension emerging in American communities isn't a byproduct of journalism. It stems from enforcement operations conducted by personnel who in many cases received minimal preparation for the situations they're managing. Against that backdrop, we saw something remarkable from a Florida congressman today. Representative Jared Moskowitz delivered an unusually direct assessment of Secretary Noem's performance, touching on issues that range from departmental priorities to congressional oversight. Before I walk through what he said and why it's significant, I want to mention that we're building something here at the Copper Show, a space for analysis that doesn't shy away from difficult topics. We're aiming for 10,000 subscribers, and if this approach resonates with you, clicking that subscribe button and leaving a like helps us continue this work. Moskowitz raised questions that go beyond the surface. Yes, he commented on Noem's tendency to appear at crisis moments in what he described as constantly changing designer attire, an observation that might sound trivial until you consider what it represents about priority allocation. More substantively, he questioned whether Noem is actually managing her department's core functions. His claim was specific. When elected officials need FEMA resources, they're not contacting the Secretary of Homeland Security. They're working around her. He also noted that Noem hasn't testified before the committee with jurisdiction over her department, breaking with the established pattern of every previous secretary in that role. That same absence from congressional testimony, he pointed out, applies to Attorney General Pam Bondi, who's now well into her tenure without appearing before relevant committees.
This is the person. This is the person who, within minutes of the shooting, went on TV and called it domestic terrorism. What, is she hiding her face like her ICE agents now? She can't show her face either? By the way, is this what the $800 billion went to? Every day we see her after there's some new tragedy in Homeland, she's wearing a different outfit with a different hat. I mean, come on, guys, she looks ridiculous. She's not just an embarrassment to the country. She's an embarrassment to you and the president. Okay, she deserves to be removed from her job by the president, and if not impeached. Not just for her complete failures in Homeland, but her destruction of FEMA. She's not even running the department. You guys know this. You guys know she's not running Homeland. Your governors and you all, when you need your FEMA money, you don't call Noem, you call Corey. You know she's not running the place. She's a complete and utter embarrassment. By the way, every Homeland Secretary has come in front of this committee once a Congress. I'd like to know the date she's coming. When is she coming?
When is she coming? When is she coming?
When is she coming? By the way, do you know Pam Bondi has not come in front of this committee? Do you know she's the only secretary to not appear in front of a committee yet? When is she coming? What's the date on the calendar that she's coming? You know what? Let's make it easy. I want to make a motion to subpoena Pam Bondi.
Second.
To this committee.
Third, fourth, fifth.
How much are we going to...
The gentleman is not recognized for that motion. However, the chair will advise as to the Attorney General coming for, as they do routinely.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. But where is the Attorney General, the only secretary to not appear, okay, in front of a committee? The only one. We're into year 2 of this Congress, and we've not had the Attorney General in front of this committee. How much are we going to weaken Article 1 of the Constitution while you guys remain in power? I watch you twist yourself into pretzels trying to defend this, running away from previous statements, disagreeing with yourself, trying to defend the crap that's happening. And so I'll make a motion again to subpoena Pam Bondi in front of this committee.
Second.
Yes. Third, fourth.
What Moskowitz identified speaks to a broader personnel pattern in this administration. The officials occupying senior positions were selected primarily for management experience or policy expertise. They were chosen because they understand how to command attention and project confidence in front of cameras. That's not an accident. It reflects a deliberate preference for individuals who can perform strength convincingly, even when their departments aren't functioning effectively behind the scenes. There's a psychological component here that's worth examining. The constant need for public validation, the staging of confrontational media moments, the emphasis on appearing dominant. These behaviors suggest deep insecurity, masked by aggressive posturing. Genuinely capable leaders typically don't require this level of theatrical reinforcement. They deliver results that speak for themselves. What we're seeing instead are political performers who've discovered that looking tough can substitute for being competent, at least temporarily. But temporary arrangements eventually face reality. Congressional Democrats are now advancing impeachment articles against Secretary Noem, which represents a formal accountability mechanism, regardless of whether it ultimately succeeds. Simultaneously, media outlets are applying more rigorous scrutiny to administration claims. The calculation that these officials could operate indefinitely without serious challenge is proving incorrect. Everyone serving in these roles, whatever their media skills or political connections, will eventually need to account for their decisions and their department's outcomes.
And if my Republican colleagues are going to do nothing right now, you better believe that accountability is coming. Here's what it looks like. The masks are coming off. Identification is coming out. Immunity is going to be stripped. And to Kristi Noem, Tom Cashbag Homan, and Greg Bovino, your asses are going to be in these witness chairs.
There's really only one language this administration consistently understands: the prospect of meaningful consequences. That's the context for Democratic lawmakers now explicitly instructing Trump officials to preserve all communications, maintain complete records, and avoid any destruction of evidence. Governor Tim Walz indicated today that investigators in Minneapolis are already encountering obstacles because video documentation is disappearing. That pattern can't be allowed to establish itself, which is why these preservation warnings are being issued publicly and emphatically. This connects directly to the media's function during moments like these. When Ari Melber cut away from Noem's press conference, he was fulfilling journalism's core responsibility, testing official statements against available evidence. Noem made multiple specific assertions during that briefing about the Minnesota incident that resulted in Renee Good's death. She described officers being blocked by a mob and characterized the situation as an attempt to cause harm to law enforcement through vehicular assault. The problem is that video documentation of the incident doesn't align with that characterization. The footage shows the vehicle making a right turn, not accelerating toward anyone. Melber stated this plainly. The evidence we can observe doesn't match the narrative being presented by the administration. Noem invoked the legal threshold for deadly force, preventing imminent death or serious bodily injury, but the video record doesn't establish that threshold was met. She also applied the term domestic terrorism to the incident, which carries enormous legal and rhetorical weight and requires correspondingly substantial justification. That justification hasn't materialized.
Since Governor Walz has been in charge of Minnesota, we have seen homicides go up by over 50%. That's also during Mayor Frye's tenure as well. Since President Trump took office, Governor Walz has released over 470 violent criminals back onto the streets here in Minneapolis.
We've been listening to Secretary Kristi Noem give that briefing there, her first formal briefing devoted to this. She made several assertions there, including saying that a mob was blocking the officers in and that they view this as an effort to weaponize and run over the officer. The video, which we played several times tonight, does not show the car going at the officer, but rather making the turn to the right. She said they view this as an attempt to kill or cause bodily harm. That's the very legal standard I mentioned earlier, which is the only legal justification for using that kind of force. The ICE agent shot this individual in the face, killing her, and then she discussed how they view this as domestic terror attacks. There is a wide gap between the available evidence and what local officials are saying, including one we heard tonight, and Kristi Noem's claims on behalf of the Trump administration. We will monitor the rest of that press conference. If there is news, she shifted from details today, which we did broadcast, to a wider set of policy arguments, including their disagreements with local officials in Minnesota regarding immigration.
This approach, interrupting official statements to identify factual problems in real time, needs to become standard practice across news organizations. We're dealing with a fundamental disagreement about what occurred in Minnesota and what it signifies. The administration is constructing a narrative in which Renee Good, whose life ended during an ICE operation, represented a violent criminal threat. The available evidence doesn't support that construction. The proposition that someone attempting to leave an encounter with ICE agents constitutes domestic terrorism doesn't withstand scrutiny. There's also an internal contradiction in how this administration and its defenders discuss law enforcement authority. Even in situations where someone has actually committed a crime and we have no evidence that Renee Good had, that doesn't create authorization for extrajudicial killing. Law enforcement officers don't possess unlimited discretion to use lethal force because someone is attempting to avoid detention. ICE agents possess even less authority in this regard because they lack the training protocols and legal powers of traditional law enforcement. That distinction is critical in analyzing what happened here. What's unfolding isn't a series of disconnected incidents. It's a coherent strategy. The objective is generating an environment where Americans perceive their government as an adversary rather than a public institution serving their interests. Russ Vought stated explicitly that he wanted federal employees to experience trauma. That wasn't rhetorical excess. It was a description of intent. And that intent extends beyond the federal workforce to the general population. The goal is making Americans believe they're being monitored, that their speech is being policed, that expressing dissent carries risks. We witnessed this dynamic recently when someone giving an interview to local news criticized the administration's military operation in Venezuela, an action that has reportedly caused hundreds of deaths. She was voicing her perspective on camera when ICE personnel arrived and detained her, citing street obstruction or peace disturbance. The timing speaks for itself. This is what systematic intimidation looks like in practice. Deploying law enforcement mechanisms to silence critics and discourage public opposition. The chaos isn't a failure of coordination. It's the model. This administration benefits from continuous crises that keep Americans distracted and fragmented. When public attention is constantly shifting between emerging controversies, it becomes harder to track the accumulated damage to institutions and civil liberties. We're not watching competent officials execute controversial but well-designed policies. We're watching fundamentally troubled individuals exercise government power without adequate restraint or oversight. Secretary Noem exemplifies this problem. The issue isn't superficial. It's about an underlying assumption that normal accountability mechanisms don't apply to her, that she can operate outside the constraints that typically limit executive authority. That assumption pervades this administration's culture because it originates at the top. These officials believe they can act without consequences because Donald Trump has consistently demonstrated he'll protect anyone who deploys force on his behalf. The January 6th pardons communicated an unambiguous message. If you commit violence in service of this administration's objectives, you'll receive protection rather than prosecution. Representative Yasmin Crockett addressed this pattern directly in her congressional remarks. She noted that ICE detained a DACA recipient on Christmas Eve, which contradicts the administration's repeated claims about targeting dangerous criminals exclusively. Shortly afterward, ICE agents detained day laborers outside a Home Depot in Phoenix and briefly held a U.S. citizen during the operation. Vzark precision law enforcement operations focused on genuine public safety threats. Their intimidation campaigns designed to create fear throughout communities. And they're being executed by hastily recruited ICE personnel, many lacking adequate training, many with concerning backgrounds, all hired to meet Stephen Miller's mass deportation targets.
Why is ICE spending resources to detain a DACA recipient on Christmas Eve? They claim they are going after, quote, real criminals, and that too is a lie. Just days ago, ICE agents detained 2 day laborers outside a Home Depot in Phoenix, briefly detaining a U.S. citizen in the process. These people are not criminals. This isn't law enforcement. This is a federal agency operating outside of its mandate, using fear as a tactic to spread fear and chaos in our neighborhoods. And it's no coincidence because Stephen Miller is rapidly hiring tens of thousands of new ICE agents. Many are poorly trained. Many have troubling backgrounds, all to meet this reckless mass deportation agenda that he has set out. We've been sounding the alarm for well over a year, and now the worst has happened. An American woman has died. That is why I'm introducing legislation to rein in ICE, demand transparency, and stop the unchecked funding that enables these abuses. I'm also joining as an original co-sponsor in an effort led by my colleague, Congresswoman Robin Kelly, to introduce articles of impeachment against Kristi Noem, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. I urge my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans alike, to join us. A woman has been murdered. Silence is no longer neutrality, it is complicity. We must rein in ICE, we must demand accountability, and we must protect our communities from this abuse of power. Thank you, and I yield back.
Accountability needs to take a specific form here. Impeachment. I'm troubled that some Democratic legislators are already expressing hesitation, suggesting that impeachment proceedings might not poll well or might distract from other legislative priorities. That's the wrong framework. When a cabinet secretary's policies result in American deaths, impeachment isn't a political calculation. It's a constitutional obligation. There's no responsible governance model where we decide that holding officials accountable for fatal outcomes is less important than negotiating over departmental appropriations. The appropriations conversation actually should be remarkably simple. Zero resources for an agency operating this way. Eliminating ICE isn't a radical proposition. It's the appropriate institutional response to an agency that has repeatedly demonstrated an inability to function within constitutional and legal limits. That's the position we'll continue to articulate here. We're working toward 10,000 subscribers here at The Copper Show, and I want to explain why that milestone matters. Independent media platforms that aren't constrained by corporate ownership or intimidated by political pressure are essential during periods like this one. If you find this kind of analysis useful, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. For everyone who stayed with us through to the end, drop a blue heart in the comments so we know you're part of this community. Continue speaking out. Continue demanding accountability from those in power, and don't allow anyone to intimidate you into silence. We'll be back with more coverage soon. Until then, stay informed and stay engaged.